Welcome to Nature Calls, Conversations from the Hudson Valley. Our team's goal is to present science-based information about gardening and all things nature in New York's Hudson Valley. Hosts Jean and Tim, along with team members Teresa and Linda, are master gardener volunteers for New York's Columbia and Greene counties. So if you're interested in gardening or nature, or nuggets of information about what's happening outside your door, settle in. Enjoy the conversation. Whatever the season, we have something to say.
I am Tim Kennelty.
And I'm Jean Thomas. Welcome back to Nature Calls, Conversations from the Hudson Valley. We're here today with Avalon Bunge and Eli Arno. Avalon is Ecological Project Manager at Partners for Climate Action Hudson Valley, and Eli is a land manager in Southern Columbia County and chair of the Town of Gallatin Conservation Advisory Council. Both Avalon and Eli are involved with the program Pollinate Now, an initiative of Partners for Climate Action. The land they manage together is one of the 4 Pollinate Now anchor sites, and Avalon is also the overall program manager for the initiative. Welcome, Avalon and Eli. So let's start at the beginning, because I've got 1,000 questions already. Tell us a little bit about your backgrounds and how you became involved with this Pollinate Now thing.
So Avalon, my beautiful wife, we met at SUNY ESF 7 or 8 years ago now. We both have master's degrees in environmental science with a focus in ecosystem restoration. And we both manage a large piece of family-owned land in Southern Columbia County. On this piece of land that we started managing about 5 or so years ago, we were really focused on managing invasive plants, and we were going to be doing grass-fed beef. And so this is kind of a long journey to how we got to Pollinate Now, but we were focused on managing invasives and doing grass-fed beef, thinking that that was kind of the best thing we could be doing, the pinnacle of like sinking carbon and thinking about landscape health. But when we officially moved up here in 2020 and seeing the spring green up and seeing the state of the invasive plant problem up here, I got very depressed, and we reached out to a Cornell professor named Dr. Bernd Blasi, who completely flipped our thinking around managing for natives. If we really want to manage for natives, we need to manage deer and not focus so much on invasive plants. If we want to think about landscape level biodiversity, it needs to start with deer. But the deer have had such a long-term effect on our landscape. They've essentially sorted out the landscape. And there are a lot of species that should be here that are missing due to the decades of deer overpopulation and historic land use. So now we focus on managing for native species, with deer being a critical component. But active restoration of a lot of native plants are also really needed. So that's kind of how Pollinate Now fell into our lap. We got to know a number of local folks, one of whom being Matt Stinchcomb of Partners for Climate Action, and he knew kind of the stuff we were working on. And he approached us asking if we'd be interested in being an anchor site for Pollinate Now. So we jumped at that opportunity.
Yeah, very cool. I don't think anybody has ever introduced themselves and said, and my lovely wife. So I really like that. That's really...
Yeah, I'm totally thrown off. I'm not going to be able to say anything else.
That's great. I think we have to go back to all our other couples that we've interviewed and ask them if they are going to introduce themselves as my lovely wife.
Well, some of the others have redeemed themselves by bringing the babies with them.
Yeah,
so,
that's
a
true.
little baby background
That's
helps.
Absolutely true. We love hearing about people's backgrounds and how they kind of got to where they are. So tell us now a little bit about Pollinate Now and kind of what are the goals, what are the themes, and it's a very cool project, so I can't wait to hear about it.
So I didn't exactly say what we were going to be doing for Pollinate Now at our anchor site. So real quick, we're going to be planting about 15 to 20 acres of really diverse native seed mix. So essentially tilling up hayfield that we'd actively restored to be hayfield as part of our grass-fed beef strategy, planting that to a diverse native mix. We're going to be doing a pretty large pond edge restoration effort and also something between 500 and 700 feet of diverse native hedgerow plantings, all specifically looking at at-risk pollinators.
And Gene, the anchor site is right near my house, so you and I might just get in the car and just like sit and watch them plant things, huh?
I love watching people work.
If you show up at planting day, you're going to be doing a lot more than sitting there, I tell you that.
Oh, no, there's a challenge.
Yeah, so the anchor site sounds very cool, but tell us about the project in general and kind of the goals and themes and things like that.
Yeah, so I kind of wear two hats with Pollinate now, and the first one is what Eli mentioned, that we were both asked together on this land to be one of the 4 anchor sites. I'll say what the 4 are, and then I'll kind of get to the program as a whole. So there's us, which is an old field system. The land that we manage was actually historically an orchard. And as Eli mentioned, we both have farming background. We had farming interest when we first got together. We went through a whole long process and decided grass-fed beef is the best thing we can do, especially because the land that we have is significantly more open than a lot of the land in our area. The town that we live in, Gallatin, is mostly forested. So having this big open field system affords us a lot of opportunity. So we are the old field site. There's also an urban site, which is in Kingston. There's a riparian anchor site in Ulster County, and there is a post-agricultural site, which is like an old cornfield system. So of each of those 4 are going to be doing major pollinator habitat ecological restoration installations starting this fall. So Pollinate Now got started kind of organically at Partners for Climate Action. It grew out of some of our co-founders' interest in their work in their own towns around doing things like banning pesticides and doing education around planting natives. We have a lot of crossover with the pollinator pathway work that's so wonderful that's getting done in this area. So this is not, Pollinate Now is not like an alternative or a competitor to any of that pollinator pathway work or to the work of the master gardeners or anybody who's planting native plants. It's really meant to be like shoring up all those wonderful efforts and kind of filling in some of the gaps that we more and more hear about. So our focus this year for Pollinate Now as a program is developing these 4 design toolkits for these 4 anchor sites and getting those installed starting this fall. That'll go on through spring 2024 and probably even a little bit into the fall of next year. Our place is one of those. We also are working on building a community of practice around all of this and, getting folks to talk to each other, get out of our silos. And we're also looking at figuring out where maybe some of the gaps in the supply chain are, because for these at-risk pollinators that we want to support, we have to plant some pretty niche stuff, and we're not sure if we're going to be able to find it all in our seed and nursery networks in this area. So we're looking at making some stronger connections with some of those nurseries and seed suppliers, and making sure that we actually have the materials and the site work professionals and all of the boots on the ground stuff to get this work done.
Okay. You have 4 sites, 4 anchor sites. Each one of them, am I correct in assuming, is going to have a different set of plants? It's not going to be the same batch of things into each of the 4. They're all tailored to the type of environment.
Yes.
So there's 4 totally different packages of plants.
4 fairly different packages of plants with overlap. So I will tell you how we started the work on creating the designs for each of the 4 anchor sites. We worked with a pollinator ecologist out of SUNY ESF she came and did 4 site visits at each of the 4 sites, so a total of 16 survey days over the growing season in 2022. And she looked at what pollinators were on the site right now. She didn't find a lot. She found the most native pollinators at our site, which is the old field site, because we kind of have the most existing biodiversity, which isn't saying much. She found almost nothing in that old cornfield site because that's just been in herbicide-treated corn and soy, conventional monoculture for decades. She found almost nothing at the urban site, which is not surprising. The riparian site is a very kind of standard issue cornfield that backs right up to the river, so there's not a lot there either. So we have these pre-surveys of the pollinators. We also have a huge amount of historical research that we've had some experts contribute to that's telling us what pollinators should we expect to see in these areas. So we started with what pollinators would we expect to see in the Hudson Valley in general, and then within that at each of the 4 different site types, kind of who would we want to see if these were intact ecosystems, which they're not. And then we went into the historical literature and looked at what plants would those pollinators need to support them. And of course, there is a lot of overlap between the sites because the Hudson Valley bioregion, there's not that much difference within. But there is some difference. There is some difference between what you'd find by the river versus what you'd find in the mountains. And we tried to spread out these 4 anchor sites. There's actually one in each of the 4 different Hudson River subwatersheds. So there is some difference in the plants, but there's also a lot of overlap.
And there's difference in soil types and things like that, right? And what will grow there, right? I mean, I assume like in wetter areas, you're going to have different plants than if you had something in a cornfield, right?
Totally. So it's not just that the 4 sites are different from each other, but each of the 4 sites has different mini designs within it. So the whole point of doing these anchor sites and creating these really specific designs is that they can be scalable and that they can be replicated by other people. Anybody from a homeowner with a container garden on their fire escape, which is how Eli and I lived for a number of years, up to like a land trust manager who's got thousands of acres under their jurisdiction. They should be able to find something in these designs that they can use for their site type. So, for example,
Site type or habitat type?
Sure, habitat type. So, Eli, do you want to just talk about what kind of mini designs are there? You already sort of mentioned it, but at our site, there's a pond, there's a hedgerow.
Right. So at our site, it's spread over about 100 acres, but we have a couple unique habitat types, all really in need of restoration. So the pond site is essentially mowed right up until the edge until a few years ago when we scaled back the mowing a little bit, and some things have come back, but it's a lot of loosestrife and a lot of cool season grasses, some native irises, and quite a bit of native sedge as well. But, what are the plants that should be on stream edges and are missing, either because of excessive deer impacts or people mowing when maybe they shouldn't be mowing? So looking at these habitats, what's missing and what can go in there. And we're not just looking at just flowering herbaceous plants. We're looking at the whole host of native plants, which are really needed and often overlooked by people looking to plant for pollinators. So we're looking at willows. We're looking at a lot of woodies, which are really critical early season forage for a lot of pollinators, and provide woody structures for nesting sites and often overlooked.
I just think it's so great because, well, for many reasons, I'm all enthusiastic about what you're doing, that you're actually you're going to be educating people about the fact that, a lot of times you get these pollinator packets and they're just a bunch of flowers, right? So, and that really doesn't do it, because usually the habitat that the Lepidoptera species is in it's the habitat of the host plant, right? So you're not really planting just for those flowers, you're planting for host plants too. So the other thing that I think is really, really interesting and different from other projects that I've heard about is that you came in and did kind of a baseline of what's there, which is really important, right? But when we're talking about what's there, we haven't talked about pollinators yet. We haven't really defined what pollinators are, and all pollinators aren't created equally, right? There's some that are more at risk than others, et cetera. So talk about what we're talking about for somebody who doesn't even know what a pollinator is who's listening.
Eli, do you want to start with that? Because I feel like one thing that we like to get out of the way early on in this conversation is honeybees, our friends, the honeybees. Are we saving the bees? Which bees are we saving? And I want to say, I love honeybees. I think that they are so cool, just like a beautiful example of an organism and a structure of whatever. That was like my longest ever farm job, was working for a beekeeper, and it was super fun and it was great. But now I kind of think of honeybees mostly as an agricultural animal. They're like sheep. If you're going to raise sheep, then that's great. That's for farming. You're not raising sheep because of their ecosystem service that they provide.
They serve a purpose, but not exactly something that you'd be finding here if you came kind of pre-colonial time, right?
No. Yeah, honeybees are not native to North America. And Eli, I was going to let you talk about it, so why don't I actually let you do that?
Well, first of all, neither of us are experts on pollinators. We're land managers looking to do kind of like what's the highest and best thing that we can do for the greatest diversity of species. But we've dug into pollinators a little bit and thought quite a bit about what we should be managing for. And when we plant in our garden, for example, we plant a cover crop of buckwheat. And what's on that buckwheat? Pretty much only honeybees. But we look at some of the native plants that we've planted out, and you can actually see this absolutely crazy video online of some native bees nectaring on some native plants and honeybees coming in like little dive bombers and flying right into these native bees and knocking them off the flower.
We're going to need a link to that, I think. Yeah.
Honeybees have a place in our agricultural landscape, but we shouldn't be exclusively managing for them in our pollinator plantings. We need to be focusing on what are the plants that we need to attract these native pollinators, and especially the at-risk pollinators, which are in such steep decline. And I can just read a little snippet from the Empire State Native Pollinator Survey, which was released last August. They found that at least 38% and as many as 60% of the pollinators targeted by the survey are at risk because they are rare or declining. For bees, up to 24% of the species may be at risk, and an additional 11% are considered possibly extirpated.
I mean, that survey kind of blew my mind, and I just came upon it, and we'll include a link to it, and there's kind of a summary to it too, because it's a lot of work that New York State put into that, and really interesting multi-year findings, right?
Yeah, it was a 3-year survey, talked a little bit about honeybees versus native bees. Of course, pollinators as a category includes more than just bees. So it does include butterflies and moths. It can include flies, beetles. Lots of our insect friends can fall into that pollinator category. And the less charismatic ones are very often overlooked and even more at risk. So yeah, the Empire State Native Pollinator Survey was conducted over 3 years by, I think it was a group of folks combined out of SUNY ESF and Cornell, and a huge amount of field research that was done really all over the state of New York, hundreds of sites, hundreds of site visits. There hasn't been that much education or outreach about it, which is actually something that I'm hoping to combat with Pollinate now. Just getting the word out there, because having numbers to refer back to is a really galvanizing force.
And I mean, it's a pretty amazing survey. And I know there was an article about it in the Albany paper, but other than that, there has not been a lot of press about it. And it's obviously a really important piece of research, but also it should be requiring some action. And you all are taking some action, but I think that more people should know about it.
Yeah, we agree. And so the pollinators that are targeted in Pollinate Now, in the design toolkits that we are creating, are specifically among those at-risk pollinators. So, we don't think about planting for pollinators that are doing fine because they're doing fine. We want to make sure to provide support to the populations that are in decline. And so that's a lot. Depending on what kind of metric you use, that could be anywhere from 40 to 60% of pollinator species in the state.
Okay, I got another third grade question. You've got your anchor sites, and you're looking at the damage that's been done over decades and what's growing there now. Logically, you understand how that got there. I run across this with a lot of historical restoration stuff. Well, we're going to restore this, but what level are you going to restore it to, and how do you know what plants should have been there in the native state? What's your source for the plant and animal listings as your goal?
That's not a third grade question. That's a key question in all of restoration work. That's a phenomenal question. We'll do our best, but yeah.
So I think what's driving the plant lists are what are the plants that attract the at-risk pollinators. So that comes first. Again, I'm no expert, but native roses are really important. And it is rare to see them on the landscape. And we do know there's an amazing book called The Flora of Columbia County, which came out in the 50s. I think the field work was done in the 40s by a botanist. And we can look through that book and we can see what was historically common, historically very common across at least Columbia County. If you have an eye for ecology and plants, you can kind of see, wow, very common 80 years ago at a time when deer numbers were at historic lows. The plants are gone. We've got deer in great abundance, but that helps inform, I think, the plant list to some degree.
And the list you mentioned, it's published on a website, right? Is it? Didn't you tell me it's on Farmscape Ecology, the list, so that if somebody wanted to access it for free and know what's in Columbia County, it's there, right?
Yeah, that Flora of Columbia County list that Eli's talking about is freely available on the Farmscape Ecology website. And I just want to plug them. They're an incredible partner if anyone doesn't know about the work of Farmscape Ecology.
And we'll include a link to that in the show notes, because you had talked to me about it when I met with you. And then I realized that one of our fellow master gardeners, Glenda Berman, had sent that to me. And it's a very comprehensive list of some really obscure things that were growing in Columbia County in the 1950s, right?
Yeah, obscure to us now, but wouldn't always have
Unfortunately
been.
obscure.
To be continued. As sometimes happens, this interview was so important we needed to make it a two-parter. Next episode with Avalon and Eli expands on the habitat restoration in the Hudson River estuary watershed. You see, even describing the interview takes time. It's worth the wait. Join us.
That concludes another episode of Nature Calls, Conversations from the Hudson Valley. We would like to thank Sandra Linnell and Devin Connolly from Cornell Cooperative Extension of Columbia and Greene Counties for production support. And a special thank you to our listeners for joining us on this episode of Nature Calls, Conversations from the Hudson Valley. You can find links to any of the topics mentioned in this episode at our website at ccecolumbiagreen.org. Comments and suggestions for future topics may be directed to us at columbiagreenmgb@cornell.edu or on the CCE Master Gardener Volunteers of Columbia and Greene Counties Facebook page. For more information about Cornell Cooperative Extension of Columbia and Greene Counties, visit our website at ccecolumbiagreen.org or visit us in Hudson or in Acre. Cornell Cooperative Extension provides equal programming and employment opportunities